Let's talk it out. Welcome to Talk It Out Tuesday, where the topics are not filtered. All dialogue is welcome, and there is no script. I'm your host, Portia Booker, and joined with me remotely today is Miss EbonyJae Hall. I'll give you a little background on Miss EbonyJae. She is a licensed independent social worker in the state of Ohio with over 10 years of social service experience. Ebony is also the founder and managing director of Enduring the Course Incorporated. EbonyJae received both her Bachelor of Social Work and Master of Social Work from the University of Akron. Ebony's approach is simple. She believes that everything you need, you already have, and she's just here to assist you as you identify your skill set and help you find a reason to smile. Welcome, Ebony.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining me. I mean, there's so much going on, right? And we need to dive into this topic of mental health right now because people need help. I mean, we're all kind of walking around here somewhat on pins and needles, right? From the protests of George Floyd's death. And then it seems that there's been other little incidents outside of that from, Breonna Taylor, also the guy that was pushed during a protest. A lot of people are kind of struggling. So we need to maybe provide some type of resources or even just some little things they can do from home if they don't feel comfortable going to a therapist just yet, also because of COVID.
Well, one of the things you just mentioned that I want to do, I guess, kind of like a shameless plug for the mental health community is that even if you're not, so like for example, me, I'm not seeing clients face to face yet, but I am still seeing clients because now we've had it for a while, but because of COVID, now everybody is able to provide what's called telehealth services. And what that is that you'll see your therapist through video call. So just like if you have Google Duo or if you have Skype or Zoom or FaceTime, any of those type of things where it's still a clinical experience, but you're at the comfort of your home or wherever is comfortable and private for you.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up, Ebony. I didn't mean to just say that people may not be comfortable actually physically coming, but I do know that telehealth services are available, and also people may just not be comfortable yet, even just opening up to somebody just yet as well. So I wanted to kind of clear that up a little bit because I'm definitely an advocate for mental health. I try to tell people, look, if you're not feeling right, whether it's physically, especially mentally, don't ignore it. I mean, really don't, because it can damage you in the long run. I mean, Ebony, kind of, just a little background on you. Like, what sparked your interest in becoming a licensed independent social worker?
So for me, when I look back, I've always been the type of person who I guess wanted to help the quote unquote underdog. So anytime I would see kids being bullied or, people didn't want to be their friends or different things like that, I would always want like go sit with that person or want to hang out and be friends with the person nobody wanted to be friends with. Because I just felt like everybody needed a friend. I don't know. And then as time went on and life happened, and I've experienced some things and I've been through some things. I wanted to continue that. So I wanted to continue to help people, and what better way than to do it in the social service field. That's just kind of how I got there. Just having a passion and a heart for people. I was in the military for 6.5 years, and which brought on another experience because I got to at one point I went to Kuwait, so I went overseas, and I got to meet a lot of people from not only a lot different states, but at this point now different countries. And I learned also that we all, like you said, just like now we're all struggling. That's how life is for us, all the time, or for everybody. And the more I got to know people, the more I got to be around different people, the more I wanted to help people. And here I am.
You right. Well, thank you for your service, Ebony. I appreciate
Thank you.
being a part of our military. I wanted to join when I was graduating from high school, but my mother said no, so that was it.
Yeah, I had to wait till I was older. I had to wait till I was 20. I think I was 22, 23.
Okay.
Because my family, I wanted to go after high school. My mom was okay with it, but my grandmother, the rest of my family was like, no, no, no. So once I got old enough where they couldn't say no, that's when I did it.
Right, absolutely. So, Ebony, let's kind of dive in. With all of this stuff going on, from the protests to all of the events after the death of George Floyd, a lot of people are kind of either um, struggling with their mental health, from anxiety to depression, wondering when is this going to end, what's going to be a solution. What tips can you offer for people, to kind of like give them some, hope or anything like that?
So the first thing I would say is kind of what we started off talking about, is making sure that you're talking to somebody. So preferably you want to work with a professional, but like you said, sometimes people aren't ready for that, or they're not. They don't know what that looks like. They don't know if they'll be comfortable. Sometimes they don't know. One of the things in our community is that a lot of times people don't know that there are good Black therapists out there. A lot of males are coming up now. This was a predominantly white male field for a long time, and then of course white females got into it, and now Black females are booming. But there's also a lot of Black male therapists, as well. And so that's one thing that I want people to be able to do your research and check. We're here. We're real easy to find on social media. I use the hashtag Black Therapist a lot. A lot of my friends do. So you can do that to find somebody and kind of vet them. But also you can, so my main point is that you need to talk to somebody. You need to express it to somebody. If you're not ready for a professional, or you don't know a professional yet, at least find one person that you can trust and that you can just kind of get it out. Because one example I use for especially my little kids, so it's going to be a little bit, I guess vulgar is the word, but one of the things that I asked her, so I'm gonna ask you, Portia. This is kind of like a quick exercise we're gonna do real quick. What
Oh,
is
that
some
works.
what is something that everybody has to do? Like everybody.
Everybody has to uh, shower. Everybody has to use the bathroom. Everybody has to take responsibility for their own actions. Well, they should. Um,
You
everybody has. Did I miss
you
the point?
no. You actually hit it. You probably one of the few people that hit it. I think people just don't want to say it. That every single person has to use a bathroom, right? Correct. Like no ifs, ands, or buts. Every single person has to go to the bathroom. So if you don't go to the bathroom for a long time, I mean, let's say a week and a half, what do you think? What starts happening?
You start to get the pain in your stomach. Your stomach starts to get bloated. You know, you, you're probably going to start retaining fluid. I mean,
Hmm. And
all
then, yeah,
types of.
you're right. And then after that, so if you still don't go to the bathroom, let's say another 2, 3, maybe another week, then what do you think happened? What happens?
You'll develop more than likely a UTI, and then other complications might happen. You might have, sugar spill over into your urine. I mean, just a whole
So
slew of.
right. So that point of it spilling over, what begins to happen at some point, and I'm not, a medical doctor, so I can't say exactly the time frame, but at some point it's going to come out. So like you said, as things begin to spill over. So one of the things that I tell my kids, my younger clients, that eventually it will start coming out of your mouth. So can you imagine? I know that it's, disgusting, but can you imagine poop coming out of your mouth? Would you want to have poop coming out of your mouth?
Ooh, yeah, diarrhea of the mouth, not fun.
Exactly. So I use that example because it's the same thing of when we're struggling, or when we're whether it's anger, whether it's depression, whether it's whatever it is, if you are not getting that out properly, then it will spill out. So just like the poop will come out of, an improper place, it'll start coming out of your mouth. That's how those negative things will happen. So when you see people being angry and tearing up stuff, or, shooting people, for no reason, and I'm not talking about cops, I'm talking about just people who are that angry and they flip, or when you see people yelling, or when you see people maybe going to drugs or different things like that, it's because what they have on the inside is not coming out properly. It's not coming out of the proper place, i.e., your mouth, your mind, or even if you write and you journal and stuff like that. So it begins to come out improperly. And again, I use that example because I feel like that's something that we can all relate to. Nobody wants poop to come out of their mouth. So we want it to come, we have a place for it to come out, and we want it to come out in that place. And
Absolutely.
it, again, it's the same thing with our emotions, our feelings, and different things like that. We want it to come out in the proper place. So when you utilize, especially a professional, if again, if you're not to that point, when you're doing things like journaling, when you're doing, I mean, we have electronic devices at this point. So even if you like, oh, I hate writing, or I don't have anything, or I want to make sure nobody can see or hear, my thoughts or whatever, you can use the notepad on your phone, or your tablet, on your computer, different things like that. But again, the point is to get that out. Once you get it out, sometimes when we just hear ourselves talking, we can understand that that situation is bad for us, or that situation is hurting us, or whatever the case is, which gets forces us to start doing something different. Is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And I'm glad you bring that up, Ebony, because it's almost like being constipated.
Exactly.
Really, I mean, I get that way sometimes. If I find that I'm like cluttered, there's so much on my mind. It's like the balloon effect. You keep blowing up a balloon until eventually it's gonna go pop.
Exactly.
So before I get to that point, I try to take time during the week for self-care. Like I make Mondays my self-care days because the weekend you have a bunch of stuff that comes at you, and then during the week. So I've designated Monday as my self-care day. And self-care for me is I get in my car and just take long drives. I love road trips. So I just go. Sometimes I don't even play music. Sometimes I just enjoy hearing the tires just hitting the concrete while I'm on the road, whether I'm going down 90 East or 90 West, going out towards Erie, going wherever. That's like my option for self-care.
And that's really good when I'm glad that you use a specific situation for self-care, because we talk about self-care all the time, especially, now social media, the buzzword is self-care, self-care. But a lot of times people don't know what that looks like. A lot of times, back in the day, people could go to, for example, the barber shop or the beauty shop, and maybe that was part of self-care. Because I know once I get my hair done, I feel much better. I feel so much better. But we've gotten to a place where that is not even. You would go there and people would gossip, and guys would gossip in their own way, whether it's about sports or whatever. But you would have that time. And nowadays we're so busy, and we're so um bogged down, I guess, to where we're not always able to do those things. 'Cause I know sometimes when I'm going to get my hair done, I have at the very least my 6-year-old with me. So that's not really, self-care. Sometimes when we're saying, oh, I'm going to the hotel, and you have your kid with you, or you have, just different stuff that don't allow official self-care. And that's not to bash, being a parent or parenting or anything like that. But self-care, you have to really take the time and be able to do something for yourself and be one with yourself. So I love what you said about how you take self-care, sometimes not even turning on the radio. Like not even just being connected to yourself, and just allowing your mind to either slow down, or allowing your mind to go, which both are beneficial.
Yes, road trips, you have no idea. Just being able to expand my thoughts openly with just being in my car. Even and then another thing that you kind of touched on was using your cell phone. We have a voice recorder on our cell phone. Just record your thoughts there.
Absolutely.
Let it out and don't keep it in, because like they say, more room out than in for a reason, right?
Exactly.
So
That's
Ebony,
good.
tell our listeners about your company, Enduring the Course Incorporated.
So, as you mentioned, I'm a licensed independent social worker, and what that simply means is that, as well as providing people with resources and connecting them to community support, I am also a mental health therapist, which you guys probably got it by now because we talked about that. Which is definitely a difference. There's a difference between a social worker and a therapist. So I just want to mention that. But in my time of working in private practice, I specialize with I think my youngest is probably 6, probably up to about 55. And but I get a lot of kids. And so a lot of times when I would get the kids to come in, and we're working on mostly, behavior issues in school, or sometimes emotions or whatever. But the parents would not always know what to do. Sometimes I have parents that bring their kids and think that once they meet with me for a while, they're going to be fixed. Sometimes I have parents who's like, okay, my child has this diagnosis. How can I support? Like, I don't want to make it worse. Or sometimes I have to tell the parents what you're doing is making it worse, type of thing. So after, years of struggling with the parents, and feeling like parents coming to me and not knowing how to support their kids, I decided to create a nonprofit to support and educate and provide resources specifically to the parent or loved one of the person with a diagnosis. So it's a little different versus, I mean, because in my opinion, there's a lot of support for a person who has a diagnosis when they're ready, if they're willing. But there's not a lot. It's just like caregivers, or it's just like, Al-Anon or something like that. So you have a person where you're not the individual who is struggling directly, but it still affects you. One thing that we kind of didn't touch on is that mental health affects everybody, every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how it comes, it comes. It affects every single one of us, whether you have a diagnosis directly, or you have a loved one who have one, or you work in the field. Like, you're going to come in contact with mental health, put it like that. And so I wanted to be able to provide support for people who are dealing with that, because it can be a lot depending on what the person is struggling with. So ETC comes in and educate the parents, like, how can you support, how, because it doesn't make sense for you to bring your child or your spouse, whoever, to me, and I teach them all of these coping skills, and they're ready to make changes and different things, and they go back to that same environment, which of course happens because I'm not therapy, provide therapy for every single person in the world. So that does happen, but I wanted to make it, like, I guess, more of a family approach, or a supportive approach, so that, like I said, the supportive person can learn without being in therapy, because everybody doesn't necessarily need therapy. Everybody can benefit from it, but everybody don't need it, if
Absolutely.
that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I'm glad you said that you kind of provide that resource for the caregivers, because it's important for them to understand how to help the person that they're taking care of. Because
Absolutely.
like you said, you can teach the person who's been diagnosed all the coping mechanisms, all the different ways to manage, whether it's anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. But if they go right back to where they've been and nobody else knows how to help them, and they're having an episode, they're just kind of SOL.
Exactly. And then when you combine that with the child who's still developing, um, it can be a mess. Just to be
Yeah.
honest. Another thing we do at ETC is provide education to educators. So I worked in a school for a while as well, and sometimes when you don't understand something, you call it what you want to call it. And what I mean by that is that we'll have people that call kids bad, or we'll have, educators who are constant, kids are getting suspended all the time
Mm-hmm.
because they're displaying these negative behaviors. And what ETC goes in and educate the teachers in a way that they don't have to study every single thing that we've had to study, but we teach them that the signs and the symptoms of, as well as parents, but we teach them so that you can know the difference between a child just being defiant and a child struggling in an area. Because sometimes we know, research tells us that, for example, if a child has dyslexia or maybe even ADHD, they will act out. So sometimes, because they have, let's just go with ADHD, sometimes they have ADHD, which delays their being on them on a correct level to read, because ADHD keeps you hyper and sometimes all over the place, or your mind, even if it's not physically hyper, your mind might be just kind of all over the place. And so you might miss out on things like learning how to read. And so now so you might do stuff, because now just think about, if you, let's say, for example, you're in the ninth grade and you're in high school and you're now let's say even younger, 7th grade, you're in middle school, which is the time where everything changes and your world is turned upside down in middle school, and you can't read, and so your peers are making fun of you or different things, the teachers calling you out. So what sometimes kids would start doing is they'll become the class clown, or they'll become a bully, become anything that they can control versus what they can't. So you won't know that I don't know how to read. All you know is that I'm always in the office, or I'm always being silly, or I'm always, so being able to go in and teach educators to know the difference, or to know some signs to say, hey, I think there may be something more going on. Let's explore that. Let's, reach out to the parent and see what we could do. So that's another part that ETC does to help support the person with a diagnosis, or somebody who needs to have a diagnosis.
And that's great that you had that. I love the example that you used about kids, being defined in school. It's not always just them seeking attention.
Absolutely.
And, we need to break down that stigma that all kids who are acting unruly are seeking attention. There may be something wrong, like seriously wrong. They may need more help in an area, and they're just acting out so you can see like, hey, I need help, but I don't know exactly how to say it.
Absolutely. Sometimes one of the things I've seen a lot is that you'll have a child who is quote unquote acting out, and it's like, well, they always doing something, and then you get the chance to talk to them and they don't have food at home. So if I'm hungry, I'm not going to be able to focus on this standardized test that you want me to take. And so, but I don't want to fail it, or I don't want to look stupid in front of everybody else. So again, I'll do something to make you kick me out the class. There are so many kids who come in my office and just be like, do you have anything? I'm starving. I don't have lunch money. I don't have, XYZ, whatever the case is. Or when I get home, there's not food. And so then, stuff like that just makes sense when you can look at a bigger picture and see that it's not just always black and white. It's not just always what you think you see. That's not always the case.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we need to take a step back and evaluate each case as an individual, not clump them all together. Because that's the problem. That's why so many, kids fall through the cracks a lot, and they get left behind because they're clumped up in the hustle and bustle of the majority.
Exactly. Another thing that ETC does is we want to make sure that we're getting correct diagnosis. There, again, I use the example of ADHD. Sometimes, so when you come in to a therapy session, the first thing that should be taking place is an assessment, where we're all in your business basically, and we're asking you all of these type of background questions, symptoms that you're experiencing right now, but also what has happened before that, or when did you first notice that things change for yourself or your child, or whoever the client is. And a lot of times people will come to me with smaller kids who have a diagnosis of ADHD, or the parent may think that they have ADHD because that's the buzzword right now, and almost everybody, especially in the Black community, have ADHD. And I don't really jump to ADHD as a diagnosis. Now, I have a standard and I have a guideline, and if they fit criteria, they fit criteria. But sometimes it's just a maturity situation. Sometimes it's just the age level. Sometimes we're used to, I'm in my late 30s, and so it was very different for me at 6 years old, where I was a lot more quiet and still, and that was the environment. But we didn't have electronics. We didn't have things that stimulate our minds all the time. Did we have microwaves? I don't even know if we had microwaves then. Maybe they were just coming out, but everything wasn't quick. You took your time. It was a slower pace of, everything, versus now everything is instant. You get information quick. It's all of those type of things. So that is going to stimulate you. So no, I'm not going to sit down and be quiet versus how we used to be. And so sometimes I have to teach the parents that, and this is whether they have an ADHD diagnosis or not, but sometimes the first thing that I like to do is see if this is, age appropriate, or if it's a diagnosis, instead of just slapping a diagnosis on people, because everything is not for a diagnosis. And then, as I mentioned with the parents, sometimes it's just a parenting issue. Like there's a difference between, you know, a client issue and a parent issue. And sometimes it's a parent issue. If you're not, for things like ADHD or just age appropriate, again, having them on a routine can decrease some of those symptoms. Making sure they're getting enough sleep. One of the things research show is that red dye is like two dyes. I can't think of the other, but I know red dye is one. And what do we see kids eating all the time? Hot chips. What color are they? They're red. So that means there's a red dye in there that could be increasing that behavior. So if you're giving your kids hot chips all day, all week, all whatever, and then expecting them to sit down, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So ETC goes and teach those type of skills on top of making sure that the diagnosis actually fits the purpose, because there are so many misdiagnoses. There are so many, and if you misdiagnose, then you can't treat it properly.
Mm-hmm.
So then people think that therapy don't work because I'm going to see this person and they're telling me to do this, and there's nothing changing. And sometimes it's just simply because the diagnosis was wrong.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of, like you said, with the whole ADHD thing, not every kid that comes through your office has ADHD.
Right.
There could be another underlying problem. And I love how you bring up the red chips and anything with red. It makes me think of a pun, no pun intended, code red. What happens when you hear a code red, everybody's running to it. So it's, you know, it's kind of like that parallel where it's like, oh, this phrase is perfect, you know. So
that's good.
So Ebony, you know, with your company Enduring the Course Incorporated, do you guys have any maybe upcoming events, or, you know, like an info session, or if one of our listeners was interested in learning more about what you do, is there an email address or anything that they could reach out?
Yes, so we had a series coming up that we had to make adjustments just like everybody else with COVID, because I'm an in-person type of person. I like to give practical things, and so I like to be in your face, and so we can conversate and figure that out. And with COVID, you know, it has to look differently. Of course, we can do video situation, but that's not in person to me, but you get what I'm saying. So we have to revamp our schedule and just kind of do things different to make sure that we're available online. So we're in the process of that. But if you wanted to reach out to us and just kind of see other things that we do, you can go to, it's ETCINCWAY@gmail. So ETC Inc. Way @gmail.
Okay, and that way, you know, if maybe one of our listeners wanted to reach out to learn more, then, you know, they could reach out to you guys directly.
And we also, I know I didn't talk too much about it, but we also provide therapy services. So if you're looking for a therapist for yourself or your child, we take cash, we take certain insurances, not all of them. So just reach out to us if that's something that you're looking for. I have a whole army of therapists, so even if I'm not a good fit, I have somebody that'll be able to fit for you. And that's important too. I want to talk about that really, really quickly, is that sometimes people think that therapy doesn't work, and it's not necessarily. Therapy has been proven. Therapy has been around for years. This is not nothing new. This is not, you know, it's new to some of us, but it's not new. But what we have to do is, and there's proven interventions, proven things that will work. Sometimes it's just the connection that you have, the person. So sometimes it's not the right therapist. And I want people to be aware of that, because just like I may not be a good fit for you, all clients are a good fit for me. I have a license that say I can diagnose and I can work with pretty much any diagnosis that there is, but I don't do that because I'm not well versed, I'm not well trained in everything, I'm not comfortable with everything. So everybody is not a fit for me. But you should be, when you're going to see a therapist, just as what I mentioned, that assessment, when we're asking you all of those questions, you should be able to ask that therapist all type of questions to see if they're a good fit for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that, Ebony, because I've had my share of, you know, therapy, and I've had to, you know, leave different therapists because the connection wasn't there. I didn't feel comfortable disclosing different aspects of my life, whether it was trauma I went through, or even, current events in my life that, are affecting me. Like, for example, with the whole protest after, the death of George Floyd, a day or so after that happened here in Cleveland, the protest, there are people going up and down my street shooting guns.
Oh,
And,
wow.
I don't want to hear that type of noise when I'm trying to go to bed at night.
Right.
Then, I have, my brother is African American. I have uncles, cousins, close friends who are African American men who I fear for, because they could just be at the wrong place at the wrong time,
Mhm.
and something bad could happen. So, not to go on a little digression, but coming back to the rent here is, you have to find that fit, and not all the time one size fits all.
Absolutely.
You have to kind of be picky and choosy.
You do. It's just like you wanna I want people to look at therapy just like anything else. If when you're shopping for car insurance or something like that, typically you don't just go to the first person that gives you an offer. You shop around and you
Right.
make sure that it fits your budget, you make sure that it has all the coverages that you need, all of those type of things. And I want you to do the same thing with, your therapist or mental health provider. You go in there, and if it doesn't feel good, then it doesn't feel good. Because your therapist should be almost like your the best friend, on the most professional level as you can. But you should be able to, if you think about a best friend, you should be able to tell your best friend any and everything. A real good best friend, you should be able to tell them, and they will never judge you. They will sit there and cry with you. They will sit there and get you together, meaning if you're doing something wrong, they're gonna be like, hey, that ain't it. They'll sit there, if you're from the hood, they'll sit there, and if it's time to fight, they're gonna fight with you. Now they might, if you like me, we might fight at this point, but when we leave out afterwards, we're gonna have to have a conversation because I'm too old for that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But in the middle of it, if that's what's going down, I'm gonna be there and I'm gonna have your back. And that's how your therapist should be. You should never feel judged. I have clients all the time that feel judged, or they say, she was just looking at me and it made me feel judged. You do have to be open, and you have to know that you're gonna have to be vulnerable, and there's times that it's gonna be uncomfortable, and
Hmm.
you're gonna cry. Tell people, like, I might make you cry, I might make you mad, because I'm going to hold you accountable for the things that you need to be held accountable for. But I'm never going to leave you there. I'm never going to just be like, oh, you could have did that in a different way. Or I'm never going to like scold you or fuss at you. I'm going to
Hmm.
teach you that you could do it. It could be done differently. Or maybe you should look at it this way. I'm going to give you other options. I'm going to give you other choices. I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you have a therapist telling you you should do X, Y, Z, then that, may not be appropriate. I'm going to suggest things. I'm going to tell you things that may or may not help. And I tell people, if it doesn't work for you, even if you're just uncomfortable, come have a conversation with me and we can make adjustments. Potentially, sometimes I just got to push you through that. You know what I'm saying? But
Yes.
sometimes we need to make adjustments, and that's how it should be. You should be comfortable enough to come and tell me anything. But
Yes.
you also need to know, again, if you have a good therapist, in my opinion, that I'm also not going to sit there. Now, the difference between the therapist and your best friend is, like I said, I'm not, as a therapist, I'm not going out there fighting with you. So I'm not going to encourage negative behavior, right or wrong. Like, I'm not going to do. I have people who come, and let's say they had a domestic violence situation, and we know how it goes with domestic violence. Sometimes they'll try to take responsibility and say, well, I shouldn't have never. And I'm going to challenge that mindset. I'm going to challenge that. Like, no, it doesn't matter what you did to that person. They never should have put their hands on you. So it will get uncomfortable sometimes. It will get to where we're, uh, I guess, battling in a healthy way. But you will never feel like, I said, like I'm judging you, or like you're alone in this process. And that's what you need in a therapist, in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And I definitely agree, because like I said, I've had my share of, bouncing between, I think I've had four, maybe five different ones in the past 4 years.
Hmm.
And I've had to do the same thing, kind of shop around, and and it's okay. It's almost like starting over. And that's
Absolutely.
okay. There's nothing wrong with, starting your life over. So Ebony, we're gonna be wrapping up here shortly, but just one last question for you. How can we break that stigma, especially in the African American community, that seeking therapy is a bad thing?
So first, I want people to say, as you mentioned, like, I love that you're being transparent to say it. So like I said, started off saying, like, we have to have conversations. The problem, I think, in a lot of, if we talk about race, if we talk about relationships, all the way to therapy, is that we're not talking. We're not expressing ourselves. We're not saying, listen, I'm XYZ. I'm hurt. I'm scared. I don't know what the heck is going on. We're not communicating those things. And sometimes we don't know how, but most of the time we do. And so you have to communicate that. And it has to be people like you and I, because I've been seeing a therapist this time for a year straight. Like normally it's just a couple of a situation and I go see somebody, we work it out. And this time it's taking me, at this point, I'm still in there. We're over a year in. So it's taking the people, other African Americans, they have to be honest with that. They have to be open with that and say, hey, or I've been to counseling as well. And even as a professional, somebody who has all of these professional degrees and license and businesses and, all type of things. We talked about one of my businesses versus I have, several. I have a podcast, all type of different things. But that doesn't mean that life doesn't hit me. So we have to be honest about that. When we can be honest and say, life hits me, and I'm doing things about it too, that makes it more normal, for one. For two, again, we have to have people that are compassionate and really want to do this work. So when people get into therapists, they're being treated well, they're being taken care of. And then we have to just know that it is, if you want to keep it a secret, you can, you have the right to do that too, but you have to do something. And a lot of times it's like, well, I've done that, or this is how it's been. And I like to ask people like, well, how is that working for you? And if it's not working for you, then how does it make sense to continue to do the same thing? So if you haven't seen a therapist, but life isn't to the full potential, or if you're not, I don't want to say the happiest, but I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. But if it's not working for you, then why would you continue to do the same thing? Why not try something different? If you try and you don't like it and it doesn't work, then that's perfectly fine. But you have to actually try something to know if it works. And you can't go back like, oh, well, my sister went to therapy and she said, because every person's experience is going to be different. And like we talked about before, Portia, maybe it just wasn't a good fit for your sister, or maybe your sister wasn't ready to address what she needed to. So we just have to start being open and knowing and trying it. We try everything else. We try, food. We get on the bandwagon of vegan and all of this other stuff. We have to be on that same thing, because mental health is just like the same. Our minds is just like any other part of our body. If you are sick, typically you go to, at the very least, you Google your symptoms. And you can do those same things with mental health. If you're feeling sad, or if you're feeling, to where it's just not a day, you can Google those symptoms, and typically they'll send you to a mental health professional. So just getting yourself educated. Like I said, I have so many therapists or mental health friends on Instagram, on Facebook, all of those things. And especially now, it's so much information being brought out there. So just checking in, just check it out and see, even in your comfort of Instagram or Facebook, and see what we're talking about, and just kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you, Ebony. And one of my big things is I tell a lot of my friends, the answer is always no until you ask.
Absolutely.
Just ask those questions. Don't be afraid, and just be open.
Mm-hmm.
Just be open.